Hey everyone, welcome back to another edition of Scaling Smarter. Today we're on a Monday because we have special guests with us today. But before we get into that, just want to say my name is Ollie Taylor from Wisdom and Wayfinder. My co-host today is Frank Maiorana from JustWorks. How's everything going, Frank?
Everything's going great. And it's game day too. Knicks game 3 today, so it's exciting Monday. But more importantly, we're excited to talk to Tiffany.
I don't know if I'm more exciting than the Knicks game.
Close. It's close. It's close. Slightly.
Yes. Today we are joined by Tiffany Slowinski from the Culture Index and also from Garden State City Lifestyle. Tiffany, so great to see you again. We were just chatting before that it's been about 2 years since you and I met in person. I know you and Frank have had a lot of conversations since then. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for inviting me on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. So Frank, I'll let you kick it off because you had a couple of really interesting places to start with.
Yeah, so Tiffany, when you and I first met, we were talking about the Culture Index, and you gave me an assessment to do, and I did it before our first meeting, and then we got together, and you blew me away with kind of what it revealed about me and about some of my tendencies. It was very eye-opening. So we've kind of been in contact, but maybe just kind of start with a little bit about yourself and just a little bit about Culture Index and what you guys actually do.
Yeah. So the second you said that, I was like, wait, I got to look up his Culture Index. And now I am on my computer and I was like, oh, I remember it correctly. I am more likely to memorize your Culture Index profile than your name. This is how I see people at this point. I see them in data points. But yeah, so Culture Index is a survey. Really simple one. I don't know how much you remember about taking it. Probably took you 5-10 minutes to complete, that measures 7 different work-related traits. So our personalities, who we are, is formed in childhood. It's a combination of nature and nurture. But by the end of adolescence, some scientists would argue even much younger than that, our personalities are pretty fully formed. Basically, we are who we are. And now our behaviors will change over time as we grow with maturity and experience and being in the workplace. But who we are on the inside, who we wake up as in the morning, doesn't change a whole lot, right? After about the age of 13. And so when I was looking at your profiles, when I first talked to you about it, Frank, I was like, oh yeah, you're like the nicest guy in the world. And he's like, yeah, I've been told that, right, before. But, I can see these things in data. And the kind of the point behind that is that people can sometimes present themselves one way that you're not going to get to just in a job interview, right? You're not going to necessarily know about somebody in the first 15 minutes of meeting them. And so it's kind of this shortcut to understanding somebody and doing it in a very scientific way.
And so what are some of the, let's say without this type of data, what are some of the biggest mistakes you see business owners make when hiring and forming teams?
Yeah. So it really varies a lot, kind of depending on the size of the business, right? What stage they're at. But a lot of times what I'm seeing it come down to is not really precisely knowing what they're looking for. So a lot of times we're hiring for the wrong thing, right? And so if you don't know what you're looking for, that makes it even harder to identify the person who's going to be best in that role. And so we tend to have a natural bias towards ourselves or people who are similar to us. So a lot of times we're going to have a favoritism towards somebody who's more similar to us in an interview process, even though I'll tell you, I'd make my own worst personal assistant, right? And so I could be looking for exactly the wrong things. So part of the process is first understanding what is the role, what do you need, but then also who do you have to be able to work with, right? Who's going to be best on your team is different than who's going to be best on somebody else's team. So even understanding the dynamics of who else is already there. So that's a biggie, is even just like even having the understanding to know what to look for to begin with.
And does that usually start with like a self-assessment? Because I imagine I've had this conversation with business owners before where for instance, maybe they hate sales, right? Which if you hate sales, that's something that you should probably, try to deal with, especially if you want the business to survive. But even if it's like not your favorite thing, and you just want to be more introverted, you should probably hire somebody who can go out and do those things as opposed to somebody who's more like you that you would have a good time hanging out with as opposed to somebody who offset your strengths.
Yeah, so sales is a great example, right? Especially depending on the size of the business you're talking about. Sales tends to be the last piece in a small business that the owner will give up. Because that's typically the first hat they ever wore was the sales hat. That's how they got it off the ground. And so it's typically the hardest piece to give away because there's a lot of times an assumption like nobody can sell like the owner. Nobody cares about it the way I do. Nobody has all the institutional knowledge that I do. And so it's a very scary piece to give away. And then a lot of times we hire salespeople and they're not very good.
Yeah.
And so what does that reaffirm for us? Like, oh, I was right. I really shouldn't give up sales. I need to keep doing this, even if it's not something that brings you joy, right?
Yep.
And the truth is, odds are you're just hiring the wrong salesperson. Not that a salesperson couldn't do the role. It's you're not getting the right salesperson in there to begin with. And sales is tricky, right? What type of sale is this? Is this a hunter role? Is this something where you've got to wake up every morning and get out there and knock on doors and cold call and have great follow through and bring a new business? And that's very different compared to their sales roles that are more inside sales, right? More account managers having to nurture relationships, take care of clients, keep them, often the person who's best at bringing in new business isn't necessarily the person that's the best at keeping the business, because a true hunter gets excited by new business and finds nothing more boring than having to take care of the clients they already have. And so that's two very different humans. And even again, understanding, like a lot of times when I'm working with businesses, I'm asking like, well, how do you get your business? How are you getting your leads? Is this all lead generation and somebody's answering the phone? It's going to be a different person who's going to excel versus the person who has to go out and find all the business themselves.
And Tiffany, I would think who you're selling to makes a difference too, right? Like, so the product makes a difference, but also like we all have different audiences, and sometimes you're selling to internal HR folks, like in my world. Sometimes you're like might be selling to a warehouse manager, right? These are much different personalities, right? That plays a role too, I assume.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's highly technical sales, right? Where you're going to have to bring in a different level of detail than you would in my, I own magazines, so I'm in advertising. Very kind of different sale than a highly technical sale where you might need somebody who's a little bit different. In that instance, maybe you have someone who's more of the door opener, and then you bring in the technical person later in the process, right? That helps close that deal. So yeah, there's an absolute difference depending on your industry, and it's not a one size fits all at all.
So Ali kind of started with it as far as knowing you're having a self-assessment. So I guess that is kind of the first piece, is knowing who I am and knowing who works well with me.
100%, right? So we all modify to a degree. I mean, most of us aren't lucky enough to go to work and just 100% of every day get to be our true selves and never change anything, right? And I'll give an example. I'm a very low patience person. I don't like to wait for things. I want everything done yesterday, snap, snap. And I move very quickly. So there's also a strength to that, is I'm a driver, right? I move things along.
Like you're decisive and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even I was getting on this wasn't working, right? The login here. I'm immediately like, problem solve mode. Let me turn off the computer. Let me grab my tech support, husband to come in and talk. Like, I'm just gonna like move this along, not sit here and throw my hands up and go, I don't know what to do, right? So there is benefits, right, to being impatient. But there's also huge downsides where it's like you could be a bull in a china shop and really mess a lot of things up too, because you don't take your time, right? Or you don't stop to think about how other people will feel. And so I know now when I'm putting people on a team that they have to work directly with me, they need a certain level of speed to them, or I know that frustration level is going to be there on both ends, right? And so, yes, there's a part of me that has to have some ability to understand them and work with them. But I also know if they've got to work in very close proximity to me and they don't have a little pep in their step, odds of this relationship going well are going to be pretty low.
Yeah.
Makes So what are so you kind of talked about before, but what are the typical or the 6 behavioral profiles that I know you kind of have people in certain types of buckets, and you kind of talked a little about before, but you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it's a lot more than 6, and there's 19 of them, which I won't get into all of that. And that's kind of the I think a little bit of the beauty of Culture Index. It dives deeper than some of the other there's other surveys that are out there, and some of them will kind of put people into like 4 colors or
Yeah.
or
Like 16 personality types and
Yeah.
the 4. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're talking about everything from visionary patterns, which are really like your big picture thinkers, your problem solvers. They're seeing where's a business going. They're concerned about where we are 3 years down the road, right? And then you've got like, well, that's great. Like you're a big picture thinker. You're the pilot. You're flying that plane.
Mhm.
But like somebody's got to land the plane, right? So you want to bring in like your research patterns because you need somebody to actually get into the day to day and get into the weeds. Because if nobody got into the weeds and accomplished anything, we could have all the best ideas in the world. We're never going to land the plane, right?
Yep.
And so your research patterns come in. Then you have your social patterns, right? We need people who can communicate with other people, who can be the glue in an organization, who can be your cheerleaders, who connect to others. And then you need your organizational piece as well. Like who's going to be in our customer service and take care of things and be willing to be inconvenienced and not mind, having to put in that extra effort there. You need your team players, right? So I'm speaking a little bit vaguely, in the interest of not getting, overly detailed here, but there's different people that are great in different roles. There's no perfect person.
Mhm.
Some people go, well, except for me, right? But there's no perfect person. There's just right person for the right seat. And
Yep.
everybody has a place where they excel. And when they get to go to work and be themselves every day and not have to apologize for it, that's when they do their best work. And so,
Yeah.
an example, you've got somebody who's not very social, and now suddenly you're putting them in a job where they're sitting next to desks of all social people who are distracting them and talking to them all day long. They're not going to get their work done.
Yep.
It's irritating, right, to
Mhm.
them. It's hard for them to focus. And so even little things of like moving their desk into a quiet room could be the difference between them being very productive
hmm
versus not getting a whole lot done.
Yeah, I remember having that experience. The last time that I worked for somebody was the sense of like I was in like a fishbowl almost, and so everybody could see like when I was working, when I wasn't, and I would try to do my best to, because back then I was doing a lot of web design, web development, very detailed oriented work. I'm talking like if there's a semicolon out of place, suddenly the whole website doesn't work, and I have no idea why, and I've got to go hunt and peck for that missing line of code or whatever. But then I have the boss or other people coming in and asking about, talking about their weekend or asking me about, music or other projects. And it's like, okay, well, this doesn't work, right? I can't get the things done that you need me to get done. And then there's other people who need me to get those things done as well. So it's just like a whole process. And I think, to the point that you were saying, like we tend to be biased towards ourselves. Like we want to find people that, people make the mistake of finding people that are just like them, that they would want to hang out with. But it's really the goal is what do you need that person to be doing in that role?
Absolutely. Yeah. You wouldn't want me doing all the detail work
Mhm.
for you. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to frustrate you, right? It's finding the right person for that role.
Yeah.
So Tiffany, when someone brings Culture Index in and brings you in, what's that process look like?
Yeah. So it's always starting off by that self-reflection first, right? Understanding who's already there, who's on the team. I need to get a lay of the land to understand what's going on first before there's any recommendations that can be made on anybody else, right? What does the current team makeup look like? What's going well? Where are the struggles? What are the pain points? And then I like to say we work with who we have, but then we also hire better. So now what are we looking? Who do we need to bring in? What positions need to be filled? Which ones have we done well with so far? Where have we struggled more? You know, a lot of times we were using sales as an example earlier. And, you know, what do people do? They promote their best salesperson into sales manager. And then all of a sudden that person's not, that's a different human, right? They're not the same person. It's not the same skill set. And so now you just took your best salesperson, you took them off the sales force. So you're losing out on those dollars. And now you got like a subpar manager as well. So you've kind of made 2 mistakes with 1 promotion. And that happens all the time. We take our best doers and we throw them up in leadership, which may or may not be the space for them. So you really want to get a lay of the land of the team, but then also understand, where do we need to promote from within? Where do we need to bring people from the outside?
And did you ever be in a situation where you have a kind of a bit of a wholesale realignment? Because you take a look and the owner is saying this isn't working, and you're like, well, this isn't working because Joe's reporting to Ali and so on and so forth. And you're like, it makes sense on why you're not having success.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's never just like come in and let's clean house, right? That's not real life either. You can't do that. But there are difficult decisions that need to be made sometimes, because it can be one poor leader that's really contaminating everything below them. Right. And so it doesn't necessarily mean we got to clean out everybody, but sometimes there can be a few strategic shifts that make a huge difference.
Yeah. Like I was thinking more of like a misalignment, not even necessarily a termination, but a misalignment in that, like, you're not having success on this team because these people just are not meant to be working together. Like their strengths do not complement each other at all. Yeah.
So I'm always looking who does that person. So when I work at a company and they're saying that they're struggling with somebody, I'm like, okay, well, who do they report to? Who do they work with? Who reports to them? Right? Because sometimes their behaviors are not necessarily that they're doing anything wrong. It's that the team below them is not aligned correctly. And so they're having to step in and do the work of 5 other people when they shouldn't be, right? So it's a lot more than looking at one single profile, one single, I say that this is a way that we get data to piece this together, but you need data on everybody. So when I go into a company, I want to survey everybody from the CEO down to the janitor, right? Because I'm like, we're working together. Don't tell me, oh, that's just a low position, it doesn't matter. Sometimes like, oh, we're just going to deal with this staff and not this staff. I'm like, we're doing it. Let's go in and let's look at everybody, because everybody brings something. And the more you can understand the entire dynamic, the better.
Makes complete sense.
Yeah.
What's the biggest and we kind of talked a bit about it as far as like, hiring for, I like this guy or this gal and they're a lot like me, but what are some of the biggest mistakes during the interview process that you see business owners make?
They get tired and they want to just get it over with.
Okay. Okay.
So it's hiring is not particularly fun. It takes time, can be expensive, right? And so we want to move this along. And so if you've had a few kind of lousy interviews in a row, then all of a sudden somebody shows up, you see the red flags, you ignore them because you're kind of desperate to fill a spot and you want to move on with your life. And then have you really solved your problem, though, by bringing in a person who's not the correct person and potentially having to go through this whole thing again in a fairly short order? And that happens all the time. And I can empathize with it because as a business owner myself, I've been in that seat where I just want to get it done with. I just want to move on. I just want to get somebody hired, because sometimes too, right? Like maybe it's an urgent filling, right? Maybe the seat's empty and, there might be other people who have to fill in and do that work until this, so there's sometimes a time pressure behind this to get it moving. And then even with the data of clients who are like, well, but I still think this guy might be good because he comes with an existing book of business and they want to start ignoring all those red flags, right? And I'm like, the data is telling us this is not the right fit for the role. Oftentimes when I start pushing on it, I was dealing with this with a client recently. All of a sudden they were telling me in the interview certain things that were being said that were also red flags. I'm like, okay, well, the data is telling you this. And then you saw red flags in the interview and you want to hire this person anyway. All of a sudden it's like, oh, wait, you're right. Maybe I need to slow down. And so I kind of say I'm like that little accountability buddy, the birdie on your shoulder, because it can get very easy to get swept up and ignore things. And I'm there to be brutally honest. I am never going to lie about what the data tells me. I'm not going to fluff it. I'm not going to make it fit the narrative that you want it to fit. I'm going to tell you what I see. And if you're talking about the odds and betting, I'm going to bet on the data every time.
Yeah. Do you do this for dating? Because this conversation sounds like something some of my friends could use.
I don't do this for dating, but I've probably every CEO I've ever worked with has gone on and surveyed their spouses. So they do ask me a lot of questions about their partners and their children.
Yeah.
Like,
well, I was just thinking. I'm sorry.
Realignment.
Yeah. Not a termination, a realignment.
I tread real lightly.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking, like, it sounds like this is something that could be useful for even for prospecting, like as a business owner of the type of clients that you want to be working for.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the most interesting, right, thing that I do is I'm typically surveying everybody before I ever even talk to them. So I'm showing up on a call and I already know a lot about who I'm engaging with. So yeah, there's an angle to that too of I know how they're going to tend to respond to me and the types of things they're going to need to understand or know, how detailed they want, how much information they're going to want. Am I going to bore them to death by going too deep or, so yeah, it is kind of, it's like a cheat code. I feel like even in my personal life, almost blind when I don't have somebody's culture index profile that I like, if I've never surveyed them for whatever reason, I'm always like, I feel like awkward about it. I'm like, I just don't know. I just don't have my information here.
Yeah. You feel unprepared. Yeah,
and I'll tell you, like I was saying earlier, I remember people's profiles better than I'll remember their names because once you see things, you can't unsee it. And it was kind of funny. I went to lunch with my college roommate back in like September. She lives in San Francisco. I was out there on a work trip. And I was like, we're eating lunch. I was like, here, take this survey. I was like, I've been curious about you for a long time. So she takes it and it comes back as her being a very low social. And I was like, even me, and this is what I do for a living, right? I was like, I don't know. This doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
And she was like, oh yeah, that's absolutely right. That's correct. And I'm like, how is that possible? I'm like, we used to go to parties all the time together. And she's like, yeah, and I was drunk at all of them. Like, she's like, I don't like a lot of people, and then I really started thinking about it. I was like, it's true. Like, there was a lot of things about her that were not particularly high social, but we were close.
Yeah.
Right. And have a relationship. And so this is somebody I've known over 20 years, probably, oh gosh, I'm getting really old. I've known her 25 years. And yet I would not have picked up on that trait until even she explained to me. And then all of a sudden, like all those dots are connecting.
Yeah.
It's kind of
she's at the party, but she's in the corner with the dog, petting the cat or whatever.
And I mean, she wasn't like a cat lady either, right? Yeah. But it was, but in social, there's more to it really than just like how gregarious you are. Some low socials know how to turn it on when it's important, particularly, right? But it's like there's social battery. Like they've got to go present at a conference. They could get on stage and be incredibly dynamic people. But at the end of that presentation, they might need to like head back to that hotel room and like regroup for an hour before they come back out because it drains them, right? And it's so we all have limits for how much we could work outside of ourselves before it's exhausting to us.
Yeah.
It's an interesting way of putting it. And then I guess there's probably a piece of it when this is why having someone that's close to you and not necessarily like kind of what you're describing is you're thinking of your relationship with them and like what that looks like together, not necessarily them by themselves as an individual, right? You kind of conflate the two.
Yeah, like I mean, our family members, our close friends, right? We're gonna have certain relationships that are not necessarily how they behave at work.
Yeah.
Right. Or I do see this as well sometimes. This happens a lot in companies. You go get a new position at some point in time. There was somebody you used to work with.
Yep.
And now you're like, oh, they would be great to come over here. And I'll like look at the culture index and I'll be like, I don't see them in this role. Oh, but they were so great at this other company. Well, what did they do there? What was the dynamics there? Were they reporting to you? Like, how do you like you knew socially maybe that you liked eating lunch with them?
Yep.
But you might not have that whole story of how they were performing in that role in another company.
Do you find sometimes the biggest misses in businesses then are like friendships and family members?
It's not that they're biggest misses, it's that we will sometimes put some rose-colored glasses on, right? But family members, I mean, lots of family members and business mix, right? And that could be a real struggle as well. I work with, family businesses where just because somebody is not necessarily in the right role doesn't mean they're going anywhere, right? You don't necessarily get to fire your uncle.
Yep.
And so a lot of this sometimes is not necessarily, like I said, about just like cleaning house. It's, well, how do we maximize for who we have? Is this someone who's going to need other people besides them to help or to do certain things that are not their strengths, right? So there's other ways to rework things to make it fit for family members. And it's just a great example because, hey, sometimes it's they're there, right? Yeah. So you better learn how to work together.
Well, Tiffany, so how does someone typically bring you into the business? Like, what are the things that you would hear someone say, like if Frank and I were going to refer you, that we should be listening out for to say, yeah, Tiffany's got to come to survey all of you and deal with this?
Yeah. So a couple of probably things you might hear. Any business is talking about growth. They're growing. They're getting bigger. Those are times when they're clearly bringing in people, and now suddenly they might have gone from a certain size team. Sometimes people have been working together for years and are like, all right, we've got to start bringing in more people at a quicker pace. Businesses that talk about turnover or just frustration. I've gone into companies and are like, I've replaced this position 3 times in the last year. Like, I'm sick of doing that.
Yep.
Like they're like, I just want to get this right at this point.
Yep.
So really businesses talking about hiring or talking about frustrations in being able to get the right people.
Yeah. Okay.
And what size businesses do you find are kind of the sweet spot for a culture? I assume probably all sizes, but that you find the most success with.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I've worked with businesses as small as 1 employee because they were starting and that owner was like, I want to get this done right from the very beginning and I don't want to screw around, right? And so that would not be typical. Usually when somebody's got at least 10, 15 employees and up to, for me, probably some of the bigger companies I work with are about 500-600 employees, but it certainly doesn't stop at that point either. I've got culture index advisor colleagues that are working with companies with thousands and thousands of employees as well. Sometimes it's funny with the small businesses, there can be a sense of importance in this as well, because when you only have a handful of employees, then each one carries a significant amount of weight.
Yes.
There's not a lot of room to just move someone around or make it work sometimes.
You lose 2 people on a 10-person team, you lost 20% of your business.
Right? So it's different, right? Than a 1,000-person company. Sometimes there's room to absorb
of course
a little bit of things,
Of course.
But even that seems like its own challenge. Just like, how do you, on a smaller side, you could be a little bit more, I guess, intimate with the amount of information and be able to move people around and put them on different teams. How do you manage that on a 500 or 600 or 1,000 person team?
Because even within that, they're broken down smaller, right?
Okay.
So this is really a leadership training program. So I'm working with leadership on, and then who are they working with underneath them?
Gotcha. Okay.
So you really got to think of it like an org chart where we're going to start high and then start implementing it lower. We work our way down.
Gotcha. Okay.
So you kind of talked a little about before. So as a small business owner yourself, right? How have you leveraged this for your hiring?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't hire anybody without this. Everybody who comes that I mean, I've done a good amount of hiring myself. I've built out my avatars. I know what I need. And it's been a learning curve myself with certain positions, not understanding what was really important in that role, right? Some of it's been, I've had to learn, wow, like that really is much more, that role is more project manager type role that I realized, right? I thought I was looking for a creative when I'm really looking for a project manager. An example of like my editor role. And so, I mean, in sales, if I don't see a hunter pattern, the type of sales we do, we are very much outbound sales. We can't sit there and wait for the phone to ring all day. And so if somebody's not a natural hunter, I'm not even going to interview them because we don't have room for that, right? If we were a bigger company, maybe they would work in some other sort of capacities. But for us, I need people who go and make that phone ring, right?
It may sound like a silly question, but we talk a lot about culture, right? In general, within organizations, like an identity that the company wants, right? Is that taken into consideration when doing these assessments, saying certain type of person would work well working here and a certain type of person would not, or is that not necessarily part? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, so it's more complex sometimes than just would work here or not.
Yeah.
Because there's different roles within the organization. And sometimes I do think with culture, people can get a little bit caught up on that. And it's, you've got your values as a company, right? And so I'm not measuring that. Like somebody could be unethical regardless of their profile. They really can be, right? And so you still need to look at your company values and if that person is espousing what you're looking for in that front. But social people are 4 times more likely to be hired for a role than a low social person, regardless of whether or not they're more qualified for that job. And I was speaking with somebody recently who told me, and I'll keep this vague because I don't want them to know I'm talking about them, right? But they applied to a very large name company. Their spouse had applied to a very large name company that we would all know, and had been trying to get a job there for like 10 years over the years would like periodically apply. And she now has a friend that works there who went and looked up the records on her application and said in the actual records of her application was, comes across highly qualified, wouldn't want to have a beer with her. Like, and this role is not a sales role. It's not something where maybe that would matter. So you'd be surprised what people, how they're being judged, right? And that was an interview from 10 years ago that's on the record, and she hasn't been able to get another interview there since because that's how somebody felt about her. And here's the truth. I know this person is probably not a person I would go grab a beer with either. But an incredibly talented person that's not part of what's expected out of them.
That's not part of the job. It's not. Right. Yeah. No, makes sense. Makes sense. Well, I guess sometimes it doesn't make sense, but right. I understand. I understand it.
I don't need my doctor to be a high social. I don't need my accountant to be a high social, right? Like I need them to be like head down in the work, in the details, right?
Yeah, sometimes we probably get, and during hiring we get caught up in that likability factor, right? That I like this person, right? Well, but they can't do this.
Yeah, and it's not to speak like social skills are important, right? It's not to diminish that, but just because somebody is good at interviewing, doesn't mean they're good at the job.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I've definitely realized that there's an art to schmoozing. You know, like being able to have those kind of conversations where people, you know, they want to be around you because they, you know, they get wrapped up in the energy of being in your presence and those types of things. And I get how important that is. But then there's also the aspect of like, okay, but can you fulfill on the actual requirements of the job? Can you bring excellence where it's required? Can you, you know, have the integrity to do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it and deliver those results? And I think that's where a lot of I'm blanking on the word, but sort of the I don't want to use trauma. That's not the word, but you know, like the kind of the mindset that gets stuck there in times.
Absolutely. It's what we favor, right? And I'm a highly social person myself, right? So I'm not going to talk down on socials, but some of what's great about us is we make friends easily, we talk to people, but the truth too, we're harder to manage because what else happens? Our feelings get hurt.
Yeah.
And we go and tell everybody about it. So we can be gossips.
Yeah.
Right. So that takes a certain amount of energy, right? And so again, who do you have to report to?
Yep.
That matters.
Yeah. What about people who are like in the middle? I find myself like, what's that term? Ambivert. I am very much the person who can go out on stage and deliver a keynote in front of 300 people, and you know, I'll bring all the energy and stuff. But then it's like, all right, I got to go take a nap. I'll talk to you guys in an hour after, and then I'll have like, you know, 4 shots of espresso, and then I'll be back. But it's like, you know,
well, the coffee helps everybody. And it's like almost 3 PM. I'm drinking coffee here. So ambivert, yeah. So in regards to everything that we're measuring with Culture Index, don't think of it as an all or nothing. It's a spectrum.
Yep.
Okay.
So think of it almost like how intense that is for you. And so there's people who are super social, right? They never met a stranger. They're like, you know, the ones at the party who know everybody by the end of the night. And then there's the other extreme, like people who are total recluses. They don't want to leave their house.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of people who are in between that, right? So a degree of being able to do it. I mean, humans by nature are actually social creatures.
Yep.
We are meant to be among others, right?
Other people,
And so I think that's kind of the beauty of the Culture Index a little bit too, is it shows degrees of things. It's not all of this or none of this, right? So I can be a somewhat autonomous person who likes to take charge, forge my own path, or I could be absolutely domineering, belligerent, difficult to be around.
Yep.
Right. And that's a total spectrum there.
Yeah.
There is too much of a good thing sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I think it sounds like that's kind of the differentiator between, you know, Culture Index and some of the other modes that people have, like DISC or MTBI or even Bank, right? Where people sort of get trapped into these labels and these identities. It sounds like you're giving room for people to be one way or the other along this spectrum.
Exactly. So Culture Index is a free choice response, meaning you could choose as much or as little as you want. Some other surveys out there might have a question and they say, are you A, B, C, or D? Mm-hmm. And you might say, I'm none of those, but I have to pick something. Or I kind of feel like sometimes I'm A and sometimes I'm B, but I can only pick one.
Right.
So with Culture Index, you could pick as much or as little as you want, which makes the depth of possible answers so much deeper, because there's a very, very big difference between someone who's maybe a little bit detail oriented, you know, conscientious, likes to get things done correctly, versus someone who's a total perfectionist, can't get out of their own way, is going to quadruple check everything they do, right? And again, in other surveys, they might just both show up as detailed, but the way those two humans are going to behave in the workforce are very different.
Yep.
Yeah, that's very key. Wow.
Now, Ali, after this call, you have to do the. You have to do the.
You are doing it.
You got. There was one piece of information that said that I was likely to be receptive and listen to someone's input, but at the end of the day, you know, make my own decision regardless. So I'll hear like, oh, I understand what you're saying. That's great. I'm still gonna do it my way. I hear exactly, like, I understand. I can articulate back exactly what you're saying, but I'm gonna do it. And it's so funny because that's kind of me to a T. Like,
Yeah, Frank doesn't want to rock the boat. He's not going to argue with
I'm
you.
not going to argue with you. I'm going, and I'll understand where you're coming from, and I'll reiterate that back to you. But I'm still going to do it the way.
It wasn't an issue of comprehension. It's just
that's great. I'm just not going to get into arguing with you right now. It's not worth it. And that's kind of what he. But it's really interesting. It was I really, and I'd be interested. So
to do ours, is that
do ours? But also, like, you mentioned something before about your personality's kind of set. How much of that can you change, Tiffany? Like how much of that, like, I know you can become more social, you can become more, like, you can develop those skills a little bit better, right? But how much of that, in your experience, have you seen that people can change? Like, is it worth me taking the test like 1 year and then taking it like 3 or 4 years later?
So you really don't change. What you do develop over time is an ability to modify yourself. And so that's part of just being an adult. So I am not somebody who is naturally a great team player. I take charge, I'm decisive, I make decisions quickly. It doesn't mean I don't have to sometimes sit at a table and listen to what other people have to say. And part of, again, being an adult and having work experience is realizing, be quiet, listen, try to engage, right? But that takes energy for me to do that.
Yep.
And when I am like think of me, when am I like totally being myself? I'm not doing that. Yeah. When I'm in my prime, when I'm like rocking and rolling, is when I'm like decision-making mode, go, tell everybody else what to do, right? So we do all modify ourselves. So you could be a low social and have learned public speaking skills. It doesn't mean you're naturally more social. It means you've developed a skill set. And so we all do that, or at least people with self-awareness tend to, go through leadership trainings, and right, we can modify to a degree, but do you want to be in a position where you have to modify yourself all day, every day? Because you're never going to be as good as when you get to be yourself. You're the best at being yourself. And so when you wake up in the morning, when you roll out of bed and you're just being you and not putting on any sort of pretense for anybody, that really doesn't change. Now, I always have like people with random examples. Like, I met a guy who was like, I had a traumatic brain injury. And I'm like, okay, I guess maybe your personality changed. Like, there are things that I'm sure can have some sort of effect on it. But when we're going to speak in generalities about general population, really, like I said, on the high end, maybe age 13, you're pretty developed into who you are.
Do you ever recommend that this be done for the job seeker or the young adult kind of getting into the workforce, trying to understand, like, what is a good setting for me? What is a good place for me to work?
Yeah, so parents love for me to profile their kids. So it's not part of my business model. That said, yes, I do think the more information you even understand about yourself at a young age, I mean, I myself, I've had career changes over my life, and maybe if I had understood myself better as a young person, that could have been different. Maybe I would have made some different choices. I don't know. But I think it is certainly helpful information on both sides.
I think so. I certainly think so. But yeah. So Ali, do you have any other questions? Because no, we're coming up on time here.
We are coming up on time, and I was hoping if you wanted to share a little bit about what you do for the magazine, how you're helping business owners, small businesses in that regard.
Yeah. So I own City Lifestyle Publications in different areas in New Jersey. And so we are luxury magazines that are mailed out to affluent homeowners within specific communities. And really what I do for businesses is get the right people to call them, not just the people calling and looking for the cheapest price. So I help tell the stories of businesses that are higher end. They want a certain clientele. They want to attract the right people to their business, not just make the phone ring, but with the right possible customers for them. And so we do that through a lot of storytelling. Our editorial is extremely important in our magazines. We really work very hard at making our publications interesting and engaging. We do a lot on social media as well. So part of what we're doing is also building up their social presence. We're helping with their Google search, their AI search. So it all really works together. But at the heart of it is really storytelling to a luxury market.
Awesome. And where can everyone find you?
So if you go over my LinkedIn, Tiffany Slowinski, you'll see everything I'm doing. You can also go to gardenstatecitylifestyle.com. And I'm always happy to connect with anybody.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This was awesome. I love the conversation. I'm gonna try to find if you can send me my results again.
I will.
I'd greatly appreciate that. And
I filled out the form to get my diagnostics, so
I will send it over your way.
nice.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tiffany, for your time. Ali, thank you.
All right, thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is great. Yeah, so thank you everybody for tuning in. I think the only thing to say after this is go Knicks.
Yes.
And I've got my Giants blanket back there, so really rooting for all the New York teams. And yeah, we'll see everybody next week.
Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.